So, hello, welcome. When I was first asked to do this lecture, I thought it would be in the Brighton Pavilion. At least I thought it might be. I grew up in Croydon, and so my sister's here, and we'd often have day trips down to Brighton. And coming down the A23, you go past that building with those mad mogul domes and minarets. In fact, I looked out the window from here and you can just about make them out. And in some ways, that would have been lovely, but in some ways it would have been, and of course this is what Sangharakshita did, it would have been the wrong place to do the talks. And this is the right place. And it's wrong because the Brighton Pavilion is a relic of a time when people had a particular fantasy of India, a regency fantasy, a pleasure dome by the sea. And it was to do with the fact that England, Britain, was in the process of colonizing India and appropriating a fantasized version of India that could be placed here so that people could come down from London and have a nice day by the sea in the midst of an Orientalist fantasy. And that's evidence of something that persists. The West reaching for the East because it has something it might offer, but it keeps missing the depth. Actually, the history of this is quite interesting. I won't go into it now, but first of all, it was China in the 18th century, and then India, and then Egypt and the pharaohs, and then Tibet, and so these fantasies have been ways of borrowing the external cultural forms, but leaving aside the inside. In fact, Western engagement with Buddhism has been part of that to some extent. I need to be a little bit careful about how I put this. But there's a sort of mythology, a myth behind each of the forms of Buddhism, and Western fantasies have gravitated towards those. So the Theravada as the pure original Buddhism, uncorrupted by later accretions. Tibetan traditions as the source of secret wisdom, transmitted through lineages of perfected masters. Zen as the direct key to non-dual being, cutting through conceptual elaboration. So I'm not saying there isn't any truth in any of those things, but there's also a myth in each of the traditions, and there's a fantasy, something in Westerners that's responded to those myths. And the problem is, with any myth, any fantasy, that it reaches for the vision. It reaches for an idea of transcendence, of something pure, something unsullied, something different from the West. And it risks becoming a search for transcendence that lacks the conditions that support it. So this brings us to Sangharakshita. As Dana Kumara said, Buddhism is more than 60 years old in the West. It's 150 years old at least. And Sangharakshita took a particular path through all of this. He spent 20 years in India and the East, but not as a tourist, as a practitioner and a scholar and a teacher. So he was inside the tradition. He was learning from its teachers and he was studying its scriptures. But he engaged with it in a very particular way. He was interested in where the tradition was alive in Asia and where it had calcified, where the spirit was genuinely present and where the form, the external form, had become the thing itself. So he wanted the spirit of Buddhism. He wanted the essence of it. And coming back to the West, he didn't want to borrow Eastern forms. He didn't want to import them. He asked a harder question. What does Buddhism have to give? Not what does it teach? What does it give? What does the world genuinely need that the tradition carries? And this is what the 1976 lectures were about. They weren't about the teachings of Buddhism, they were about the gifts of Buddhism. I come to you with 4 gifts. The first gift is a lotus flower. Do you understand? My second gift is a golden net. Can you recognize it? My third gift is a shepherd's round dance. Do your feet know how to dance? My fourth gift is a garden planted in the wilderness. Could you work there? I come to you with 4 gifts. Dare you accept them? So the second gift, the golden net, is this talk's subject. The teachings point towards a vision of human existence. And vision means that which is seen. It's a direct perception of reality. It's not an explanation of reality. So in the Buddhist understanding, at least in one formulation, vision comes first. The glimpse that changes everything. So this is what Buddhism calls the path of vision, the darshana marga. And what comes next is a process of transformation, the bhavana marga, where you have to remake with what the vision shows. How we follow this path of transformation, the subject of the other lectures. It's next week, I understand, Parami will be here and speaking about Sangha. So this talk is about the vision, what it is, how it's given, what conditions allow it to be received. So the core of Sangharakshita's lecture is an account of conditionality, how things come into existence and how they change. Giving the vision is itself a question of conditionality. So giving the vision in full means attending to the conditions at every level. And this talk continues that question. It's not a commemoration. It's not happening simply because another talk happened 50 years ago. I've been in this community since 1979, and I've lived through its history. And that history is evidence. So it's the same gift, but we're in a different position. We had a vision, and Sangharakshita laid it out, and then many of us, thousands of us, have been living out that vision, for better and sometimes for worse. And this talk will touch on some of that history. It's formed by it. And I'm still working with all of the things that I've taken from that history. The book, Reimagining Buddhism, was my attempt to understand what Sangharakshita was doing at the deepest level I could perceive. But of course, a book like that, maybe any big project you do like that, is partly about its subject and it's partly about the writer. I was working out what I think, and I was working out how to hold in balance all of the complexity of the vision and the process of transformation. And I did that in the hope that others might do the same. It might help to others do the same. And this talk is part of the same work. So let's move now to let's just note the gap between where we are now and 1976. So the world of 1976, I mean, I was a little bit younger, a little bit too young to fully participate in the culture. And I'm not going to expatiate about Harold Wilson and James Callaghan and Margaret Thatcher and the Sex Pistols and all that. The relevant part of the culture was the counterculture, the legacy of the 1960s coming into the 1970s, and the certain kind of openness to spiritual experience that brought. So 50 years on, the world has changed in so many ways. How has it changed? Well, for one thing, technology has altered the conditions of consciousness. We live not just in a time where it's interesting to explore what we might do with our attention. We live in an attention economy. And the attention economy means exploiting the reactive mind. It means manufacturing distraction as a business model. The smartphone is the wheel of life right there in your pocket. And social media, all that, what plays out very often is greed, hatred, and delusion, but amplified, accelerated, monetized. And so we have a mental health crisis. It's hardly surprising. But how are we responding to that mental health crisis? The dominant response is to manage the symptoms rather than questioning the conditions that produce them. At the same time, the world isn't becoming more secular. Trust in institutions is collapsing, but the hunger persists. Bible sales are through the roof. There's this very widespread interest in psychedelics. There's a younger generation that is turning towards spiritual life, often in the form of Christianity, often in its more evangelical forms. All these are signs of a culture reaching for the golden net without knowing what it's reaching for. Now, Buddhism's main entry into this culture has been through mindfulness. And I was a mindfulness teacher for 15 years. I don't do it very much, but I still do it a bit, teaching mindfulness in secular contexts. So actually, I've got quite an appreciation of the positive aspects of mindfulness. At its best, what I think it does is it opens to people a non-conceptual mode, and it meets a hunger for a different way of being. However, mindfulness has entered the mainstream culture. As it's entered the mainstream culture, is really more about managing effects than causes. Stress management, a way to chill out, a way to relax at the end of a crazy day. So without the larger vision, without community, without the imaginal dimension, what mindfulness in the mindfulness movement, of which I've been quite a central part in some ways, but what we're doing is we're offering a door without a building. You know, the practice becomes simply a way to sustain well-being. And the vision opens something different. The transformation that the vision initiates is what the other gifts are about. And what we have to offer in Triratna isn't a better mindfulness program. It's the vision itself. It's the golden net given in full. So what is this vision? Well, On my left, and if you're watching the video of this, you won't see this, but there's a large and beautiful image of the Buddha. And this is the Buddha, point of enlightenment, I imagine. We can imagine him at that point in time beneath the Bodhi tree. So what did the Buddha see beneath the Bodhi tree? Because this is what any authentic expression of the Buddhist vision is trying to articulate. So we can say that it's all beyond words and so on and so forth, and of course in a sense it is. But when the Buddha started to realize he needed words, he started to describe how everything's changing all the time. Things arise and pass away, not arbitrarily, but in dependence upon conditions, natural conditions, not through the will of some deity, but through a natural process. And so conditionality is at the heart of Buddhist thinking, all Buddhist thinking, really. Sangharakshita has a particular account of it, where he sees conditionality operating in two directions. One is cyclical, things going round and round in circles. The same patterns recurring, action and reaction, pleasure and pain, birth and death. Then there's another dimension of, or another direction for conditionality, which is the spiral, where each factor augments rather than cancelling the one before. So pleasure doesn't just give rise to pain, that's the cycle. You know, we go from pleasure to pain, from pain to pleasure. No, it's actually possible for pleasure to give rise to joy, and joy to delight, and so on. So that's the frame of the Buddhist vision. And in his lecture, Sangharakshita talks about one of its particular expressions, the wheel of life. So many of you will know the wheel of life. I'll sort of evoke it a bit. He really goes to town in evoking the wheel of life. But in the middle of it, you've got these three figures, three animals chasing each other's tail, and their greed, hatred, and delusion, going round and round and round, eating each other up, chasing each other. And then you've got another rim, which is figures on a downward trajectory and figures on an upward trajectory. That's kind of the basic pattern of karma, the choice that we have. And then we've got six realms, or six worlds in the next rim out. And beyond that, we've got a series of 12 scenes around the rim. They're called 12 links or 12 nidanas in the Buddhist languages. There's a blind man with a stick. There's a man with the arrow in his eye. There's a woman offering a drink. And behind them all, there's this monster clutching the wheel. The wheel is actually a mirror. It's us reflected back in with an understanding. And then above the wheel, there's a robed figure pointing. So what's going on with the wheel? It can be seen as a cosmological diagram, something like that. But really, we can take it as description of what it feels like to be caught in the reactive mind. The different realms we can inhabit, the process of going round and round and round in circles. Does that seem familiar to you? Seeing that clearly is the start of the vision. It's the first movement of the gift. But then, and sometimes you see the Buddha pointing to the space between the man with the arrow in his eye and the woman who's offering a drink. And that is the moment before feeling, that's the experience of being struck, becomes craving, that's the grasping. And in that space comes a second gift, comes the second gift, the golden net. That space between the experience that the world gives us and what we make of it, That is the vision. And this is how Sangharakshita gave it. At first, there appears to be a path that stretches far away into the distance, winding now through cultivated fields, now through dense forest. It traverses swamps and deserts, broad rivers and deep ravines. It winds around the feet of mighty cloud-capped mountains. Eventually, the path disappears over the horizon. But now the symbol changes. The path seems to straighten out, to stand up. It becomes a great ladder, stretching from heaven to earth and from earth to heaven. It's a ladder of gold, a ladder of silver, a ladder of crystal. But again, the symbol changes. The ladder becomes slender and solid and turns green. It becomes the stem of a gigantic tree with enormous blossoms, blossoms that are bigger the higher up they are. At the very top of the tree, shining like a sun, is the biggest blossom of all. In the center of each of these blossoms, sits all kinds of beautiful and radiant figures, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arahants, Darkas, Darkinis. The path through swamps and deserts is what the vision looks like for the person treading the path as it winds through difficult terrain. The ladder is genuine ascent when the conditions are met. The tree is what arises. It's organic, it's alive, it's growth as the expression of something intrinsic, seeking its own form. The radiant figures in the calyxes are the Buddha's inner nature, the enlightened qualities that practice moves towards, held before the imagination as the objects of faith and aspiration. These figures show what human existence is and what it can become. So this is the path of vision. It's a glimpse of the peak. It's not the journey. That's transformation, that's the other gifts. The vision itself, given directly to the imagination. And the Buddha is the center of it all. The radiant figures achieve their radiance through Shakyamuni. Shakyamuni over here. He's the trunk from which all the branches grow. And this is the key to how Sangharakshita understood the Buddhist tradition, that all of the traditions, however different they may be in form, grow from the same root. They grow from the historical Buddha who sat beneath the Bodhi tree and saw conditionality clearly. From that specificity, the gift was first given. And Shakyamuni, the Buddha, is also how we can hold the whole Buddhist tradition together, not by resolving all the doctrinal differences and all the rest of it, but by recognizing the common root. This is the luminous tree in Bhante's description. It's also the refuge tree, the image that order members like me sit before in some of our practices. It's that's the same vision, resituated within a specific lineage. I'll talk about that more at the end of this talk. So next, I want to say something about, to unpack the vision a bit. So that's the vision, the tree, the path, the spiral, all of that. But what is it, and what does it require? So let's think about the Eightfold Path. That's one of the classic expositions of the Buddhist teaching. It starts with this phase, the stage of what we call samyak drishti, samaditi, or Sangharakshita translates as perfect vision. That's the first step on the Eightfold Path. You start with the vision. It's not right in, right view and so on. It's sometimes, but it's not theoretical like that. It's a direct perception of reality. It's a way of seeing that changes how everything else looks. And what is the faculty that enables us to be able to perceive in that way? And for Sangharakshita, the best word for that faculty is imagination. So there's elements of faith, there's elements of wisdom, but imagination is the faculty that enables us to see. Not imagination in like making things up. Imagination in the sense that someone like Coleridge used it. The faculty that transforms experience, that discovers meaning, that has in it something more than the individual. And this faculty, and it took me quite a long time to work this out, it's this quality that's what drew me initially to Sangharakshita's teaching, has actually continued to engage my deepening interest and engagement. It's the imagination that's at the core of his work, and the way it opens out to poetry, to beauty, to the sense that of talking about what we're doing in practicing Buddhism as a process of growth, of evolution, as if the whole thing is a living process, an organic process. That's what I love. And in Reimagining Buddhism, the book I've just written, what I'm trying to do is to locate that imaginative visionary faculty as his fundamental outlook at the core of his work, the gift alive in the giver. Now, is that all that there is to Buddhism? Well, clearly not, because there are lots of teachings, there are lots of ideas. But one way to think about this is that Buddhism teaches in these two modes simultaneously. And maybe that's because we've got left and right hemispheres of our brains or something like that. Maybe that's just the way we're built, that we need ideas and we need images. We need concepts, we need the imagination. So think about the Four Noble Truths, right? The most basic Buddhist teaching. The first one is the truth of dukkha, the fact that there's suffering in our lives, in the world. There's unsatisfactoriness. So, the Buddha's first teaching, he names it. He says, this is the first noble truth. But when we come to tell, when Buddhists came to describe that whole process, they started with the life of the Buddha. And in the biography, there's the four sights. Do you know the four sights? The Buddha leaves the palace. He sees old age, sickness, and death. He sees them embodied in particular people. And then he sees a wanderer who is showing the path. So it's the same teaching. The four sights, the first three sights anyway, they're the same teaching as Sabbe Sankhara Dukkham. All conditioned things are unsatisfactory. It's the same teaching. In one case, it's a concept. In the other case, it's a story. And the story presents the First Noble Truth directly through the eyes of a young man who can no longer look away. So, the same vision, two modes, and the image speaking to something a bit more primary, a bit closer to drishti, to vision. The golden net catching what the concept alone cannot hold. So let me invoke one of the Buddha's scriptures. It's called the Vinaya Sutta. I really like this one. A king is sitting in his palace and he hears the sound of a lute. He hears music. He's never heard music before. And he's captivated. It's delightful, it's tantalizing, intoxicating, ravishing, it's enthralling. And he says to his attendants, bring me the sound of the lute, bring me the music. And they return soon after with a lute. And he says, no, I don't want that, I want the music. And they say, Your Majesty, the sound arises through numerous conditions, the body of the lute, the skin of the lute, the neck, the frame, the strings, the bridge, and then we need someone to play it, Your Majesty. And he says, no, I don't want all that. The king wants the vision without the conditions that make it receivable. He wants the mountain peak without the journey. I climbed up Mount Snowdon a little while ago and felt a great sense of achievement and a certain sense of superiority over the people who'd taken the funicular railway up to the top. But the sound can only arise with the conditions. There's no other way. And the same is true of the vision that we might aspire to, the vision that Sangharakshita set out in that talk. So we have the path of vision, the darshana marga, and the path of transformation, the bhavana marga. The vision first, the initial insight. It's the glimpse that changes everything. We hear the music. Then there's a transformation, the thoroughgoing remaking of our whole being in accordance with what the vision shows. We learn to play the instrument. So, vision and transformation. Now, another reason to update this talk of Sangharakshita's is that his thought moved on. His thought about conditionality developed. So what he was trying to do in founding and establishing the Triratna, and what he was really focusing on in 1976, was there's two things really. He wanted to show people how to practice Buddhism. And secondly, he wanted to build a movement that was capable of transmitting the vision. So in both cases, he was presenting a path of transformation. Welcome to the meditation class. Tonight we'll be doing the mindfulness of breathing practice. In the first stage of the mindfulness of breathing, you breathe in, you breathe out, and you count one. Hands up everyone who's said those words. Many of us probably all heard them. So that means communicating the ethical and psychological conditions that are necessary, the practical path that people can actually work with. But Sangharakshita also knew something else. He knew that authentic Buddhist practice includes something that this account doesn't fully capture. So this is why in his lectures, the gifts, well, in the poem, first of all, the gifts are expressed as images, and the lectures move into this kind of poetic, visionary mode, like that passage I quoted a few minutes ago. And in Sangharakshita's teaching as a whole, he stresses faith. In Triratna, we engage in all sorts of ritual. There are Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, just look around the room. And all of this is pointing to a dimension beyond the pragmatic and the rational. And it's as if there's, yes, it's conditionality, but it's of a different order. Something else is at work. And as Sangharakshita thought about this, he continued to think about this for many years. He started to talk about orders or levels of conditionality. Not just one thing causing another thing, but this happening on all sorts of subtle levels. And he talked about 5 niyamas. So one level he calls the karma niyama. Karma means action. So it's the way we act and the way our actions have consequences. You might think that is basically what conditionality is all about. This is the ethical order, and it's where most of us live. It's where our actions shape our consciousness, and where consciousness shapes future experience. That's how it works. We make an effort, we get the fruit. But at a certain threshold, something happens. Something else begins to operate. And he calls this the Dhamma Niyama. This is the order in which awakening itself arises. And it's not, you don't get the Dhamma Niyama just by being more and more ethical. It's not that you become a really, really, really good person and then you have some kind of transcendental insight. It's not quite as simple as that. It's about creating the conditions for something else to arise. We pluck the string and the music sounds. Something arises that's larger than the conditions. So, imagination comes next. Between the karma niyama and the dhamma niyama stands imagination. It's not reason. That's not what gets this magical extra element, without which we don't really have the dharma, we don't really have drishti, we don't have vision. It's imagination. And it's a faculty. He talks about imagination as a faculty, and that's how we approach it in Triratna. Not just something you're born with, but something you can develop and train in. And we train in it by giving it objects worthy of its attention. We train the imagination by giving the imagination objects worthy of its attention. The wheel, the spiral, the 3 jewels, the puja, the arts, and at ordination, we deepen that through taking up sadhana practices, meditation on a Buddha or Bodhisattva. And that makes the imaginal mode primary. And that's really our character in Triratna that we've got from Sangharakshita. And the radiant figures in the calyxes of the luminous tree are what that looks like. The imagination genuinely cultivated. The imagination showing what the Dhamma Niyama is moving towards. The vision showing its depths. So Sangharakshita described, he sometimes talked with a certain kind of, expressing a kind of bemusement at the experience of having founded this order, as if it was something larger than his individual intentions, as if something more had worked through him. So you get this really in the lectures. He had faith in what he was building, even though its outward form was quite modest. In 1976, the previous centre had basically been a squat. The early communities actually were squats, and but he called it Pundarika, the blue lotus. Not know what colour is Pundarika anyway. I don't know, the lotus, white lotus. And then they were building this, what became the London Buddhist Centre, and it was an absolute, well, it was a building site, but one with a serious amount of work needing to be done on it. But he called it Sikhavati, the Pure Land. And these heroic figures who were building Sikhavati, who were they? Rather scruffy bunch if you look at the images of the time. And they were young. But he was undaunted. He saw beyond that to the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara that they might become as an order. He believed in the order. He believed it was carrying something that the order members themselves could only partially see. And that something, you could call it the bodhicitta, this kind of suprapersonal will to the enlightenment of all beings. this kind of cosmic compassion, something like that. It's the Dharma Niyama. Something of a different order. So how do we make this happen? How does this happen? And really, I think there are two dimensions which have been circling already. The first is ethics and Sangha. This is where Karma Niyama operates, where our actions shape our consciousness. And the second is the imaginal faculty. And that operates through symbols, through Buddhism, bodhisattvas, and so on. So, ethics without the imagination means becoming a better person. This is what Sangharakshita calls horizontal integration. The imaginal without ethics produces a fantasy. A fantasy version of spiritual life that excludes our human limitations. Now, Sangharakshita said that both are necessary. Horizontal integration and vertical integration. And that is what giving and receiving the net requires. So we're going to look now at how all that worked out in practice. Before I do that, what about the king? Remember the king with the lute, who was told that the music comes through the combination of all the parts? Well, he was furious to be told this, and he smashed it into pieces. He broke the pieces into little smithereens, and he stamped upon the smithereens and said, "It's a sorry thing, this lute." He wanted the vision without the conditions. He wanted the sound without the components. And so he destroyed what he was looking for. So, the 1976 lectures give the vision with all the confidence of a founding proclamation. I was thinking about this just a moment ago, just sitting there and thinking, yes, I'm waiting to give my talk. 50 years ago, someone else, actually younger than me, was waiting to give his talk, just whatever it is, a few hundred yards away over there. But he spoke with the confidence of a founding proclamation. I speak, we listen from inside the experiment. 50 years of conditionality operating through our lives. The vision meeting human beings over actual time. The path of transformation underway. Sometimes it's what he called the path of regular steps, and sometimes it's been very irregular steps, but it's been genuine. So the founding vision had a prophetic quality. Sangharakshita in this period talked about Triratna, the FWBO, as the wind horse. You know, this great mythic horse that carries the three jewels on its back. He talked about it as Avalokiteshvara with 1,000 arms. And that's a genuine glimpse of the peak, a genuine giving of the vision. But the irony I find in talking about the 1970s now is that very often when I do so, it's in the context of criticisms. It's in the context of talking about casualties, about things that went wrong. And this is all part of the complexity of revisiting those lectures now. So, and the movement in the 1970s was formed in part by those lectures. The lectures were the vision, but they cast a shadow, you know, in attitudes to families, in attitudes to gender, attitudes to sex. So what's going on? what happened? And my suggestion is it was a vision proclaimed before the ethical conditions for sustaining it were fully in practice. It was a young community who lacked the maturity to carry the weight of what they were being offered. But nonetheless, making real progress, reaching for the path of vision, but before the path of transformation had fully laid the ground. Now, I'm not saying that as a moral verdict. I'm saying it as an observation of conditionality in operation. Different causes producing different effects and different things happening all at the same time. The vision, genuine and producing genuine effects. Ethical failures, real, and producing real effects. Both simultaneously. And the legacy is our karma, including our shadow. And some effects have been acknowledged and addressed, but the shadow's still there. I'm working on movements communications now. I'm dealing with this all the time. All the time. And also I'm working at the Cardiff Buddhist Centre. I'm dealing with this all the time. I remind people that what we're talking about happened 50 years ago. But it's alive now. It still shapes how we're received. What people bring with them when they first encounter us, what we have to work through before the vision can be offered and received. What should we do? Well, the only possible response is to practice or engage with the karma niyama, that we take responsibility, that we repair harm where we can, but most importantly, that we make new causes consciously, that we act for the good. And that's the vision. When the vision arises, the teaching's quite clear. We sustain it and we go back to the beginning, we go back to the path of regular steps, and we act ethically. At the same time, most of us in the order, I think, experience the order as something genuinely wonderful, something really surprisingly wonderful. It's a community at real scale, a spiritual community of thousands of people with very strong connections to each other, very positive. Many of us trying, some of us, or some of you, making very impressive progress. And all the other stuff as well. And what we've got isn't a consolation prize. It's karma. It's real causes producing real effects. The glimpse of the peak sustaining the journey, the vision alive. So I'm going to offer, somewhat tentatively, no, actually not tentatively, presumptuously, that's the word. I'm going to offer three findings, three things that I think we've learned. So the first one is that ethics and Sangha aren't just preliminaries to receiving the vision. So I think actually we know these three findings in Triratna, but I don't think they've been learned in the wider Buddhist world. And I think these are things that we have to offer more generally. Ethics and Sangha aren't preliminary to receiving the vision. They are the conditions within which the vision, once glimpsed, can be sustained and deepened. Ethics and Sangha, these are the regular steps that prevent that glimpse from being lost. And it's really hard work to sustain a Sangha of 3,000 order members and how many thousand other people. It's a long process for people to be ordained. If any of you are in that process, sorry. Actually, I don't mean that. I'm not sorry. It's important. It's following the regular path. And actually, I work with a lot of the more senior people in the order. What they spend their time doing, I don't so much, is mediation, restorative processes. It's bits of inspiration. It's ethical problems, safeguarding, all that stuff. Ordination processes that get complicated. People, should this person be ordained? Should they not? All that stuff. That's what a lot of those people are spending their time doing. I've somehow managed to avoid it, thankfully. I've got other crosses to bear. But it's hard work, and we only grow as fast as our maturity permits. But what grows is real. That's why the ordination process takes so long, because what grows is real. And actually, another thing about those lectures and that time was a sort of kind of millenarian idea that, Triratna would grow and there'd be millions of members, and we would, the old society would become the new society. In other words, Britain becomes a sort of Triratna state or something like that. I don't know. Something like this. When you get excited, you can start thinking about all those sorts of thoughts. Well, we haven't done that, have we? But we've learned something about what it means to cultivate a genuine spiritual community. Second finding, the imaginal dimension isn't optional. So myth, devotion, the bodhisattva ideal, sadhana, these are the conditions through which the vision is received, and imagination is the faculty through which it's apprehended. The vision, to grasp the vision in its fullness, requires imagination. This is a thought partly relevant to the mindfulness movement, offering the door but not the building. The opening without the vision that gives it direction. And secular Buddhism, I am really quite sympathetic to these things in some ways, and secular Buddhism going further, but it denies the framing that makes the vision possible. To secularize Buddhism means to accept the framework of secularity. And that can't accommodate the Dhamma Niyama. It can't accommodate that sort of magical element. So Triratna's objective is the full lute. That's what we're about. We're about the full lute, the instrument and the music, the karma niyama and the imaginal simultaneously, the horizontal and the vertical integrated. And this is our project. If we do that, it's a genuine re-expression of the Buddhist tradition in its fullness. It's not a reduction of it. It's not a compromise because we can't hack what Theravadan monks do or something. It's not. It's the tradition in its fullness. Third finding. The vision can only ever be given as embodied in real, imperfect people, in real, imperfect communities, following the path. The sound arises through these components, this bit of wood, this bit of catgut. The tested vehicle, the tested vessel, is actually more adequate than the pristine one we might have imagined. It's encountered and survived what giving the vision encounters when it meets real people. I really like the poet Wallace Stevens. In one of his poems, he evokes this sort of a vision of perfection, transcendence. And then he says, there would still remain the never-resting mind, so that one would want to escape, come back to what has been so long composed. The imperfect is our paradise. The never-resting mind is the karma niyama, operating always in everyone. The desire to escape it into pure vision, into the sound without the lute, the peak without the journey. That's the Brighton Pavilion. The imperfect is our paradise, because it's the only place where the vision can be given, received, sustained, and deepened. The regular path, step by step, and the irregular path where we jump ahead to the end and then have to go back to the beginning again. The lute with all its components. And what do we do with the never-resting mind? We practice ethics. And what arises through that, when the conditions are genuinely prepared at every level, when the path of transformation has proceeded sufficiently, is characterized by the imperfection of the process. Then we have the vision deepening. Then we have the sound, the music, the gift. So the third gift, the nucleus of a new society, is the Sangha, as the community in which the vision is alive collectively. And the vision generates community. Gifts belong together, and that's what the next talk will be about. So, let's speak a little bit more personally to close. So 2 days before I was ordained, in 1992, I went for a walk with my preceptor, Subhuti, and we climbed up. We were in Guhyaloka, which is this kind of rocky valley, limestone cliffs and all that. Limestone? Yes? Okay, good. And we climbed up to the top of one of these valley walls. And we wanted to look out across the landscape or something like that. Anyway, as we sat there chatting, I have to say, being 2 days away from your ordination in a very intensive 4-month retreat, rather concentrates your mind. The clouds came in and they surrounded the cliff, the ledge we were sitting on. And so we were on this kind of rocky outcrop in a sea of cloud with the transcendent blue sky above us. It was quite amazing. We were marooned in cloud. And it was this sense of transcendence, of having left the world behind. But we were talking, and I wanted to talk about what was on my mind. And actually what I wanted to talk about, 5 years before the subject found its way into the newspapers, was my concern about the ethics and legacy of Sangharakshita's sexual behavior. That was what was present for me 2 years ago. So when people say to me, no one ever talked about this or anything like that, it's really not true, in my case anyway. And Subhuti said, and I think that's because this was an issue in terms of being able to fully make that commitment. Subhuti says, look, I don't know what to say. I don't know. But I do know that I've had an experience of Sangharakshita over many years in his fullness, in his depth, and I trust him. And actually, rightly or wrongly, that satisfied me because it was honest. It wasn't an answer, on one level. It was an answer on another level that I found did satisfy me. At the same time, I knew that the issue remained. 2 days later, I was ordained. I walked into a stupa 2 days before my friend Subhadasi, who's sitting here. And in that stupa, I encountered something very vivid, incredibly tangible. I've actually never experienced anything like that in a sort of sacred space. And no doubt that was what I was bringing, but it felt like I was walking through a textured air, and it was textured by a sort of spiritual energy. Quite amazing. Actually, I remember once going, my sister's here as well, we went to the Dome of the Rock and to the cave under the Dome of the Rock before you could no longer go there, but when I was a teenager. And it was just after Ramadan or something, and I remember stepping into it, and there's the Kaaba where Abraham was said to have sacrificed Isaac, and Muhammad ascended to heaven, and all this sort of thing, and feeling a similar kind of texture in the air. But it was a very different feeling. The quality of that texture was quite different. So I stepped into the stupa, and I hadn't anticipated that feeling. But the conditions for it had been carefully prepared. They'd been prepared in the course of the retreat, of which that was a center, and they'd also been prepared through the ordination process, which involved recognizing to some extent, and I now think it was rather limited extent, my own limitations and my own shortcomings, and also maybe my potential. And to some extent as well, recognizing the limits of what I was entering, the human frailty of the order, as well as its scope. The vision and the ethical reality simultaneously, and they weren't resolved then, and that process has continued to unfold. So in writing the book I've just completed, Reimagining Buddhism, that was my attempt to understand Sangharakshita at the deepest level. I'm not saying I succeeded, but that was my attempt. And as I said before, a book like that is always about the writer, as much as the subject. I was working out how to hold the vision and the shadow, the genuine achievement and the genuine difficulties, the imaginative core and the mixed legacy in honest balance. And I wrote it in the hope that it would help others in the community do the same. And this talk is part of the same work. We're still working with the karma of the 1976 lectures. The helpful, the vision transmitted, a real community, people genuinely transformed, the tree growing, and the unhelpful, the shadows, the difficulties, the conditions we're still living within. The karma niyama work of addressing this, taking responsibility, creating new conditions. The lute isn't being split into splinters. The path of transformation is being walked irregularly and genuinely. The regular steps are being taken. The music, I believe, is playing. And that's what 50 years has taught us. Going for refuge makes sense for me in a way it didn't fully make sense before I walked into that stupa. Not as a doctrine, but as the act that holds all of this simultaneously. The vision and the conditions. The glimpse and what the glimpse requires. The ideal and the reality of the community attempting it. The Buddha as the living embodiment of what the vision shows is possible. The Dharma as a structure of reality that the vision discloses. Conditionality, the niyamas, the path winding through the actual terrain. The Sangha, as the community attempting this together, each of us imperfectly, each of us genuinely. And the preceptor witnessing that. So Sangharakshita defined an understanding of going for refuge that others may share if they wish, and then witness in others in turn. We don't go for refuge to a person, but to what the person points towards. And the luminous tree is the refuge tree. Sangharakshita revised the Triratna refuge tree in 1993, placing the Buddha at the center, the teachers of the major schools as mediators, his own teachers surrounding them, the universal and the particular held together, the timeless vision within a historical form. Sangharakshita died in 2018, but the tree remains, and this is the gift. At first, there appears to be a path that stretches far away into the distance, winding now through cultivated fields, now through dense forest. It traverses swamps and deserts, broad rivers and deep ravines. It winds around the feet of mighty cloud-capped mountains. Eventually, the path disappears over the horizon, but now the symbol changes. The path seems to straighten out. It becomes a great ladder, stretching from heaven to earth and from earth to heaven. It is a ladder of gold, a ladder of silver, a ladder of crystal. But again, the symbol changes. The ladder becomes slender and solid and turns green. It becomes the stem of a gigantic tree with enormous blossoms. Blossoms that are bigger the higher up they are. At the very top of the tree, shining like a sun, is the biggest blossom of all. In the center of each of these blossoms sit all kinds of beautiful and radiant figures. Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arahants, Darkas, Darkinis. Thank you.